Thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. And think about how often today you use a virtual voice assistant to find products and services. Over 50% of consumers have used voice search to find local business information. Over 40% of those users look for a local business daily. And over 75% of smart home speaker users use local searches at least once a week, and half of those are daily. Some predict that over 50% of all searches will be off the screen and completed by voice by 2020. Alexa, Siri, Cortana, and Google Home should be part of your strategy today. Today's episode is with Kyle Harris, who is the product director for DAC Group. With his deep understanding of voice search technology, we'll discuss how the technology continues to change and how marketers can best prepare to optimize and design for voice searches. So let's listen to a voice expert and the sounds of a shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. So thank you, Kyle, for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today. And I wish if you would tell us a little bit before we jump into the topic. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, sure. So my foray into digital started about 8 years ago when I was actually working at Indeed.com. This was back when Indeed was kind of just figuring out that job search engines were kind of the way of the future. And it was really that foray into, kind of seeing and getting to be a part of a company actually building a search engine that really got me into kind of what the power of search was and really got my appetite going on that. So much so that I actually left and I said I have to get into the real search engines, the Google and the Bings of the world. And I came over to DAC Group to work at an agency to really get a good understanding of lots of different industries and how they ultimately wanted to play in that search world. So about 6 years ago, I started here at DAC Group. We're a full-service digital agency. Kind of an agency with some technology, so that's kind of how the product side of what I'm doing really worked out. Came over here and did a lot of customer service, and then ultimately decided to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of product, and really have not looked back. And DAC has been kind of kicking around for over 45 years at this point, and we're the largest kind of holding company agency actually based out of Canada. And yeah, definitely excited to be here.
Great. So most of our audience, they're going to know about voice. They're going to know about voice products like Amazon's, Echo and Google Home. But kind of, if you will, give it at a high level before we dive in. Talk a little bit about where we are with voice today and where we are with, and we can sort of dive into voice search.
Sure. So we are at the very, very beginning of voice search. I mean, probably everyone remembers when Apple came out with the iPhone 4, and there was this super cool thing called Siri, and everyone was, figuring out that you could get to change your name in it, and you could set an alarm in the morning. And it was very rudimentary at that point. It was, definitely an assistant, or it was supposed to be it back then.
It was like 100
really
years ago.
More so. Pretty much it was.
Seems like.
But at that point, it was really more of a gimmick. And why it was a gimmick was you were never confused that you weren't actually talking to your phone. You weren't confused that you were not talking to a real person. And what's really happening to start now is we're getting a lot better at being able to converse with these types of digital assistants. So it opens up a lot more paths, to the point where they can make appointments for us, where they can understand people that aren't necessarily native to a specific language. They can understand, kind of different dialects and slang. So that really opening up the opportunity there is really making voice search, or really even a better way to think of it outside of voice, is just any type of search where you're not necessarily using a screen or your fingers to type something. Those are going to be a lot more easy, and there's going to be a lot more function that can come out of those types of searches.
So if you think about it, we've gone from print to desktop to mobile and now to voice search. And if you're, there's so many applications as far as marketing is concerned. But when you look at specifically local listings, how does voice search affect us as marketers today?
Oh yeah. So, I mean, voice search is really going to affect quite a lot of what we're doing. So right now, it's a lot of people giving action commands to their voice assistants. So it's, hey Alexa, turn on the lights in the living room. It's, okay Google, play this band on Pandora. We are starting to get into some more, hey Alexa, order the brand of toothpaste that I already purchased. You have my purchase history. You know the brand I like. You know the size I like. You know the quantity I like. So there, you are getting some of those transactional types of e-commerce or voice commerce actually happening on those platforms. But I think the opportunity really exists where when we stop thinking of them as digital assistants like Alexa and Siri and Google Assistant, and more so just think of them as really smart assistants. And to give you an example of what that would look like, hey Siri, order gum for me is very simple, right? Gum is something you would buy at a five and dime store. You don't have to worry too much about the brand you get. It's kind of something you buy and you throw away. It's very disposable. The flip side of that would be something like buying a refrigerator, right? Which is a $2,000 plus type of purchase, and it's a lot more involved. You care about it more. A lot of people would look at voice search and say, well, that won't happen there. I need to be able to see it, feel it, etc. But the interesting part here, and really where the future is going to, is when we say, hey Alexa, I'd like to buy a refrigerator. The answer won't be okay. It will be, well, what size? And it will be, and what type of features are you looking for? Do you want it? Do you want the freezer to be on the top or the bottom? Right? Are you looking for there to be, a water filtration system in there? And really, what it's going to do is actually act like a true assistant, like you would get actually in store, and it will ask you questions that you might not even thought of prior to asking that first question to it. So I think where we are now, it's very transactional. You can ask very simple things like turn on the lights, unlock the door, do things along those lines. But in the future, it's really going to be like talking to an actual sales rep for anything that you can really buy, which is a pretty unique situation to be in. And I think we're right on that cutting edge of this.
Well, and I think that also, especially with e-commerce, takes into account payment options on top of it. I mean, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but talk about where you think we're going with payment options. If you are just wanting to order gum, because if you think about, especially if you're using Alexa to order something, and that's where Amazon Pay has really jumped in, or some of those familiar payment plans. Talk a little bit about payment options in e-commerce purchases with using a voice assistant.
Yeah, so the buying gum is a perfect example, right? It's honestly easier to say, "Hey Alexa, order gum to the house," than it is to pull out your phone, do a search on the Amazon app, find out the gum that you want, or go back to your past shopping cart. It's honestly way easier to say, "Hey, just order me gum," right? Like that, it's going to come. It's going to be super. It's going to be simple. However, what we have to think about is how is the payment of just that transaction going to work? But beyond that, where exactly does Amazon and Google and Apple of the world start to make money on that actual process? I think the answer really relies on the transaction. I think gone are going to be the days where lots of these companies like Google, where they make most of their money right now through ad revenue, right? They have used to be 10 blue links on a page, and at the top there were tons of paid advertising, and on certain categories, like insurance, people are spending tens, if not hundreds of dollars per click. In a world where there's no screens and it is very transaction based, really what's going to happen is all of these different types of voice search assistants are going to charge you a transaction fee for making that process so simple. So from a hey Siri or hey Alexa, order me gum, right? Amazon is going to charge whatever vendor is actually selling that gum. So if it comes from Doublemint, Doublemint gets paid for selling that gum, but Amazon makes 10 cents, 5 cents, etc. They make on that microtransaction of actually connecting that buyer and seller. And I think it's going to be exactly the same thing with Google. I mean, you can see it's why Google is making all these partnerships with places like Walmart. So you would say to Google, "Hey Google, please order brand new paper towels for the kitchen," and Google gets them sent there, and Walmart ends up paying Google for being the fulfillment side of that voice transaction. So I think that's how payment is ultimately going to work. I mean, everyone's digital wallet is going to be pretty seamlessly integrated into that. I think the payment side that's more interesting is instead of generating money off of ads, which is definitely the historic way to do it. It'll be more transaction based, and kind of all of these places will get paid from being the intermediary that connects buyers and sellers.
Great. So then let's dive a little bit further in, and should I mean, you've got Alexa, you've got Home, you've got the iPhone and Siri, and you've got Cortana. Should a voice strategy be different across those platforms for marketers?
Yeah, so I don't think that you really do need to worry about that. So I think that at the end of the day, there is going to be a loser and a winner when it comes to search, right? Especially voice, right? Like right now, depending upon what country you're in, definitely in the U.S., 90% of the leads that are happening from a traditional search standpoint are happening because of Google, right? They have most certainly the market share, which is important. Now, Amazon came out and did absolutely hit the market before Google did when it comes to voice search. They have, I think, at this point of this recording is probably, I think, about like a 66% market share of all homes would actually have Amazon as compared to anything else, which is quite substantial. However, the strategy that you actually need for each and every individual device is going to be very much the same, right? So whether someone says, "Okay, Google, I'd like to do these things," or Siri, I'd like to do them, or Alexa, I'd like to do them, I think the strategy of what you actually need to do to win those types of searches is exactly the same, right? There's going to need to be some sort of database that ultimately powers all of those voice experiences, and they are going to be based off a lot of the exact same things, right? I think you are still going to need to have a website so that all of these different places can understand who you are and what you're about and what your most frequently asked questions are, and ultimately what forms of payment you accept and what experiences are. I think you're going to have to get into the review side of things pretty hard. I think having reviews on Google and on Facebook and on Yelp and really all the different places that could fuel these are important. But again, a lot of these things are the same. It's just more so you're optimizing for one voice strategy. It just does touch on a lot of different things. But yeah, no, I would not tell any marketers out there right now that you need to have a specific Amazon strategy versus a Google Home strategy. I think it's a lot of the same thing, but we should definitely get ready at some point in the future where we might not need a Google action and we would need a Siri, we would need an Alexa skill. I do think there will be a shakeout of which one actually ends up being the vast majority winner. And if I have to, I don't necessarily want to, but if I had to actually pick who I think will ultimately win that adoption kind of tipping point here in the U.S., I would think it's Google. I think they have so much of a head start when it comes to being a true digital assistant that will help people with non-screen based search. I just can't see Amazon actually beating all of the years and years that Google has on them from that standpoint. From a hey, order me these quick things, Amazon is unbelievably good at product fulfillment and supply chain management, but voice search is going to be more than that. As soon as these things get really complicated or complex in terms of what answers they can give, and I just don't see anyone out there kind of competing with what Google can bring to the table from that point of view.
Great, really great points. And I'm waiting to see a resume from somebody who comes in and says they're a Cortana specialist. So I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it's coming. But so let's talk a little bit then about searches and how somebody to think, for a lot of people that aren't familiar with it, how do you win searches across these different platforms? I guess most people are going to think about how they win a Google search query. Talk a little bit about how people win that for voice search across any and all platforms.
Yeah, so I think there's two different ways that you can go about that. So number one, and I think this is very hard to get people to think outside of this box, but you can help your brand, you can help your marketing team quite a lot if you try to answer the question instead of trying to win more of non-brand searches. So instead of trying to win, how do I buy a refrigerator near me? How do I order gum? And get more so brand related searches. So, hey, I want a Kenmore refrigerator. Hey, I want double mint gum. If you can figure out how to get people to say your brand name, whether that's on a phone book or that's on a desktop or mobile tablet or voice search, those are the types of searches that ultimately end up in purchase checkouts, credit card transactions, reservations at your restaurant. Those are the ones that really, affect your bottom line. So in terms of how to win at voice search, being a strong brand and making sure that people are saying to Siri, to Alexa, to Google Home, hey, launch this skill, launch this app is definitely going to be important. Now, again, once you're doing a good job with that, there is still non-brand that you're going to worry about. So when someone does say, hey, I'm looking to buy a refrigerator, right, to their digital assistant, which one's actually going to come up? Because we're living in this version in the future that is really going to be kind of scary, but true. There's going to be only one single answer. We're going to live in the kind of Ricky Bobby world where if you're not first, you're last. So when you say to these digital assistants, hey, I'm looking for X product or I'm looking for X experience, right? They're going to give you whichever one they think is the best answer, and they're only going to give you one. So how you really start to optimize for that specific scenario is really a couple of different things. There's some technical things you can do with things like schema markup, where you can make sure that you are providing to all of these digital assistants as much structured data as possible. And if anyone doesn't understand what structured data is, go to schema.org and read up on this. I'm telling you, it will not be a waste of time.
Absolutely.
But
Couldn't agree more with
yep,
that point.
yeah, but I mean, outside of that, there's definitely HTML5. There's focusing on reviews. There's listing management. So if you're a brick and mortar or a service area business where you're serving a specific, geography or region, it's incredibly important that you are, listed in Google My Business, that you're listed on Bing Places, that you have a Yelp profile that's claimed, right? And making sure that all of these voice assistants know exactly where you are, because fulfillment for a lot of these searches is going to be important. So looking for a plumber, looking for an electrician, look for someone to fix your air conditioning, you're going to want someone that can come over quickly and that can do the job correct. So they're going to need to know where you are, what you do, and really what your reviews look like. So I think in terms of those optimization things, it's how can I get people to say my brand name, because that's going to be very, very important in the voice search world. And then how do I make sure that I am structuring all of the information that I need from a structured data point of view down to a kind of listing and reputation management. I think that's ultimately how you can wrap up your strategy there.
And to your point earlier, as I was listening to you talk a little bit about how to win these searches, it's going to be really interesting to see what types of accompanying marketing go with that. Are people investing more now in, TV, for example, somewhere that helps get the word out about Kenmore refrigerators, so that they'll remember it when they do a voice search later. To your point about whether or not Google will win the battle on search assistants at some point, I tend to agree with you, especially when it comes to a service, because if you think of, Bob the plumber, you're not ever going to ask for, Bob the plumber necessarily. Most people aren't going to know exactly who their plumber is, but they're going to need a service for find me a plumber. But you're generally, like you said, going to know the name of a refrigerator that you're interested potentially in buying, a well-known brand name. That sort of covered a lot of the B2C market. With there being so many searches done now by search assistants, is there a B2B play? And, since a lot of these searches are done at a home, I don't normally see people in a cubicle, talking to their Google Home device. But is there a different strategy that you know of? Is there something somebody should do differently for a B2B type play?
So the B2B is a really, really interesting point. And I think even when you think about B2C type products, like let's take Procter and Gamble or any type of like car company, I think that you think of them as ultimately being, brand to consumer type of products. Like you think of Kellogg's, or you think of granola bars. You ultimately do buy them in store, but how they get there is incredibly B2B, right? So Procter and Gamble doesn't necessarily always worry about the consumer. They worry more about how Stop and Shop and ShopRite are going to get their products, and how to ultimately display them, right? If you're a car company, I mean, for years and years, I think that ultimately, Ford and Chrysler and all these other companies haven't really been producing cars necessarily with the consumer in mind. They've been actually producing them with the dealership in mind. So when it comes to B2B, I still think you have to really fully understand who you're actually marketing to, and make sure that you're producing content and products that really the end user is really looking for. And I think that we have a bit of problem on the B2B end where we forget who the actual consumer is, and we actually think of the middleman as who we should be producing for. So I think when it comes to voice search, it's really just going to exacerbate that problem.
Sure.
Because again, there's not that, okay, we put out a bunch of things and we're able to choose a lot from them where selection is really high. When you're in that, Ricky Bobby world where if you're not first or last, if you from a B2B type of standpoint are not actually producing things, right, that people really want to look at, and you don't have the content to support all of those things, I think the companies that end up being winners and companies that being losers will just be exacerbated quite a lot.
Then let's talk a little bit about the clarity of answers. And if you think of a voice assistant always starting with, a question, Alexa, what is blah blah blah. Let's talk a little bit about the answer that comes back and how you position your product or service with a correct answer so that it answers the question that somebody is searching for in using their voice assistant.
Yeah, so I think that it's going to be really important. I think there's a little bit of a social responsibility on the side of the voice, assistants when it comes to certain searches. So to give an example, hey Alexa, how do you do the Heimlich? They can't say, hey, this is sponsored by blah blah blah, right? And then launch into kind of like a mask that you can use while you're doing CPR, right? Like there's definitely some legal issues as well as moral issues that come to this when you say, hey, Alexa, how do you do the Heimlich maneuver? How do you do CPR? They need to immediately launch into those types of answers. On the flip side, right, if you ultimately want to sponsor some content when it comes to other types of things, I don't think there's too much of a problem from that point of view.
So then let's talk a little bit about accuracy and how does that change the context of searches. And I'm thinking of particular product or service. Well, we talked about plumbers, for example. Find a plumber near me. Something that's sort of those kind of keyword based type questions. Talk a little bit, if you will, about the accuracy needed.
Sure. So, I mean, if you were a local plumber, right, it's going to be very difficult for you to worry about, all of your online presence, right? You're worried about, number one, you're probably your own HR department. You're probably your own finance department. You're probably your own, every department, right? These are definitely, SMB type of people. So when it comes to, having to manage and making sure that everything that you have online is accurate, it becomes a little bit, too difficult. So I think if you, have the time, have the effort, all of the information for, how to make sure that you are accurate online is most certainly at your fingertips. But it can be difficult, and there are definitely some companies out there, DAC Group as one of them, that can definitely help you with this. There's also, great blogs you can read up on things like Moz for, how do you actually make sure that all your information is correct online, right? And you'll start to learn about things like core data providers and for, other really important mapping types of software out there that's like Here and TomTom. So, I mean, even as a, small plumber that's, working on Main Street, all this information is available out there to you, but I wouldn't, shy away or be scared of working with a third party company. The ROI can definitely be there, and the time saving could also be something that's very important to these business owners.
So, talk a little bit about how somebody ranks well for voice search, and with the context of, is it fair for a marketer to believe that if they're ranking first on Google, will they rank first on Google Home?
So, how you ultimately rank well for voice search is you have to do a bunch of different things. There's unfortunately no surefire way, like maybe in SEM or in paid search, you could say, hey, it's an auction, and whoever pays the most and has a high quality score, they end up being at the top. Unfortunately, with voice search, that's not really how it's going to work. I don't think there's going to be those very specific media budgets that ultimately power this. I think it has to be more so of an organic play, which is why it's really important that that transactional layer of how these companies will make money really filter in. So we understand that it's going to be organic focus. Well, then we start to think about, well, how does organic voice search actually work? And really, it's about answering the fundamental question that has been asked in the best possible way. So if someone says, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, or Z, right, there's going to be a database of information that's really important for each of these assistants to understand. So things like structured data are going to be incredibly important, right? And if you don't know structured data, right, that's schema.org. Additionally, there's going to be things like HTML5, which is kind of like the blueprint of how your website is actually laid out. There's going to be things around reviews that are going to be very important, because as people are conversationally asking these digital assistants questions, they're clearly going to be laid out in a more long tail fashion. So instead of doing a search for refrigerator near me, you could do, hey Alexa, what is the best refrigerator near me that has a freezer on top and has an over 4-star rating, right? When it's so much easier to type in all that extra information, it's going to be important for these digital assistants to have that information, right, in an underlying database where they can serve it, right? Additionally, I don't think it's too far away from now when these assistants are super, super interactive and really helping guide you through the purchase process, where they'll ask you, say, hey, now that we've collected all this information, would you want me to give you a couple options based on price? Or would you like to give you a couple options based on, closest to pick it up? Or would you want to find out the products that are most highly rated around you, right? Ones with the highest seller rating. So when it comes to, ranking specifically, there's going to be a litany of different things that you need to do. I think a couple of low-hanging fruit things right now is make sure that your website is updated to HTTPS, right? We've definitely seen a couple of, beyond anecdotal responses here, that those things like that do actually help you rank when it comes to voice searches. Additionally, anyone that doesn't have an extremely robust FAQ page on their website is definitely missing out on an opportunity there. Voice search is going to work in a very in a format that we're very used to, which is question and answer. So an FAQ is literally a frequently asked question page on your website. So if you can take and write out in conversational form all of the questions that people would ask about your brand or products or services, well, then the digital assistants can read those as answer when they inevitably get asked. There's a bunch of different things along those lines, but yeah, I mean it's not one size fits all. There's no one specific thing I would focus on too much. I would just more so say, for each brand or marketer, think about what someone would be sitting down and asking to the voice assistant, kind of the digital assistant, and really just figure out how to produce the best customer service possible. I mean, if you have a good user experience, you are going to have a good time in terms of selling things and closing business. A really good example is, think of what Apple did to the cell phones, right? They came out with an incredible user experience that really couldn't be matched, and that's why Apple is such a powerful company now. It's that when that phone came out and you were able to turn it sideways, and that home button was perfect, and really everything that it was doing was really customer-centric, focused, that's really where they started to make an impact. And that would probably be my number one optimization for what you can do voice search. Just think about how people would want that skill or search to work out perfectly and try to design for that.
So, Kyle, thank you very much for this discussion on voice search and for lending your voice to voice search. How do people get in touch with you and with DAC Group?
Yeah, so you can find us online at www.dacgroup.com. There's a contact form, and we'd be more than happy to discuss really anything voice related, but anything else that you could possibly think of from a digital advertising standpoint, whether it be search display, social content, website pages. We are in it to win it, and yeah, we'd be more than happy to help SMBs all the way up to multi-location brands.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kyle, for being on A Shark's Perspective.
Cool, no problem. Take care, Kenneth.
So there was my conversation with Kyle Harris, a product director with DAC Group, and our look at voice search technology. Let's take a look at 3 key insights from that conversation. First, we should stop thinking of Alexa and Siri, for example, as digital assistants and start thinking of them as really smart assistants. Think of a day to come soon when the search component goes beyond something simple and transactional to something like the search capabilities that you would get if you were dialoguing in a store, asking questions that you hadn't even thought of as part of the process. Second, at least at this point, the strategy you need for each device will likely be the same. What's important is that you'll need a website with FAQs and payment options with reviews on different channels. These are crawlable resources that will fuel a database. Ultimately, you're optimizing for one voice strategy. Third, instead of trying to win non-brand searches, try to get your brand name mentioned and then structure and optimize for that. Those are the types of searches that will really affect your bottom line. And remember, these assistants will only give you one answer to your question. So, in the immortal words of Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, you're last. It's about asking the question in the most fundamental way for the consumer. Have a question? Then feel free to search for me on LinkedIn and send an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this show regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.